There is a lot of acronyms when it comes to Google. And so I wouldn't bore you with a lot of those acronyms. And what I'll try to do is try to explain it in an ordinary way with FLEDGE, because I do think we can get lost in the technicalities sometimes. So FLEDGE itself is an acronym, and it really is the first experiment around programmatic retargeting when third-party cookies disappear. Now, for a lot of advertisers where, let's say, a large chunk of their media spend is focused on programmatic, then you can imagine that this is actually quite a key part of the marketing mix, and one which cannot necessarily be ignored or cannot be compensated by shifting that spend to other ad platforms. And when we look at FLEDGE, there are the key functions around programmatic retargeting, which is targeting, which is the audience, the bidding, the messaging, and reporting. Those functions exist in the current programmatic framework that needs to be translated into FLEDGE, and FLEDGE needs to be able to accommodate those various functions. And they have come up with the various design elements that ties to those particular functions around programmatic. So for example, when we look at targeting, FLEDGE talks about interest groups and how the browser essentially records and maintains those interest groups, which is analogous to an audience or a segment that the advertiser would want to be able to retarget. The bidding, this is where I think the biggest change in the framework, and that is that all the bidding happens on the device. So that unlike it is at the moment where it's off device, all the bidding happens within the browsers. There's a lot of work that the browser needs to be able to do here and perform. Messaging, one thing that stood out for me is that it's a new term, which is called what's called fence frames. And essentially what happens is that the creative itself is essentially wrapped around a wall where no data can possibly be leaked out from it. And so that's what Google calls a fence frame. So it's a very draconian way of rendering an ad on a third party or publisher website. Then there is reporting. And how this is going to be done currently is on an event level. So that means that you can actually see the winning bid per browser and also what ad was rendered. However, going forward, it is likely that this will be replaced by another web incubator project from Google, which is called attribution reporting or aggregate reporting. And that is something that is still in the works. And so I would imagine that this will be refined as we go along. But for the time being, we can actually report on the event level, but going forward, that may not be possible. So if I look at FLEDGE and look at it from the buyers and the sellers point of view and the web visitor. So the web visitor would visit a variety of different advertiser websites, and for every advertiser website that person visits, the advertiser may create an interest group. The advertiser could actually own that interest group and manage it themselves, or the advertiser can delegate the permission to a third party. That third party could be an ad tech platform, like for example, Relay42. That could also be a DSP, which is typically the traditional way of buying ad space through a DSP partner. And when that visitor then visits a publisher website, they will join a number of interest groups. What happens then is that the advertiser will see all those interest groups that are on the browser and initiates an auction. The seller will basically score every single interest group along with the ads that those interest groups present, and they will declare the winner based on those interest groups. That is really, in a nutshell, what happens within FLEDGE. And there are numerous demonstrations that one can view here as well. And Relay 42 also have a demonstration around this if anyone is interested. So this is really how it works without going into too much of the actual technicalities, because within each one of those elements, design elements like interest groups, in-browser auction, messaging, and also reporting, there are just a ton of things to get your head around. And right now, I think there is safe to say that no one has the full picture in terms of what FLEDGE ultimately looks like in the end. However, from Relay's point of view, we are actually looking at it from the advertiser's point of view, from our clients. And so what that means is that we're looking at what are the opportunities that FLEDGE presents and what are the threats as well that FLEDGE presents, and whether there is, early mover advantage for adopting FLEDGE for some advertisers. And we are actually actively trialing FLEDGE with a couple of clients of ours. One notable client is a very large e-commerce company, because they have such a rich data set, and also it kind of lends itself to this kind of experimentation as well.
So then we're gonna have paid advertising only based on first-party cookies and no third-party involved.
No. And it's safe to say that FLEDGE, it's quite a dramatic departure from what we are used to, in the sense that it's completely cookie-free. There are no identifiers being sent around at all. What I would like to explain in this slide is really the way that the auction works, and also introducing another component, which is what is called a trusted server in this case, because this particular component is actually quite key to how FLEDGE would work in a very dynamic and very fluid environment where there are millions and millions of users and basically hundreds and thousands of buyers and sellers. So on the one hand, as I explained before, you have the buyer, and then on the other side, you have the server. And in the browser cell, you have what is called a worklet. A worklet is essentially a piece of code that does a lot of the work, all the heavy lifting. So what tends to happen is that if a user is on a publisher website, the publisher, whether they themselves or they may even delegate that to an SSP, they will initiate the auction, and they will select a number of buyers that can participate in this auction, because they do have the right to say, these are the buyers that we would like to sell to. Likewise, the buyers will be able to choose whether they want to participate. So there's a handshake that happens initially where the seller selects a number of buyers, and the buyers will basically declare that they want to participate in the auction. Then the buyer will fetch the real-time data, and this is where they will fetch the real-time data from the trusted server. For example, you actually might want to adjust your bid. You may also want to adjust your ad. Instead of showing this particular creative, you want to make sure that there is an alternative creative because it's more recent to what they're interested in, for example. So there needs to be a mechanism for FLEDGE to be able to accept data or metadata dynamically to adjust the bidding criteria. And then the seller will also fetch real-time information from the trusted server. Maybe because what they've said is that I may no longer want to be able to render this type of ad, or basically they would say that these number of buyers are now what we want to sell to, because originally we may want to sell to any buyer, but now we want to basically be a lot more selective, purely because there's a lot more demand for my ad space. And so the seller has the option of fetching that real-time data. Then the buyer will generate the bid, And so there will be a number of different buyers that would basically generate the bid, and the seller will process each bid and what's called scoring the ad. And each ad will have essentially a desirability score, and the highest desirability score will win. Now, this is a slight departure from some programmatic auction currently, because some are based on second price, some are basically direct buys, so therefore there is no real contest around that. So there is a slight departure in terms of the way that basically the auction rules are applied within FLEDGE. And like I said, the trusted server is actually a key component in all this, purely because there needs to be some information that has to be adjusted dynamically so that both the buyer and the seller are prepared to pay for a particular ad, and the seller is prepared to show a particular ad on their web property. So this is really FLEDGE in a nutshell. I mean, there's a ton more detail that we can actually go into and explore. Like I said, we are trialing this for a couple of advertisers, and I have to say, so far the observations are quite mixed in terms of how this works. And certainly one of those observations is that it definitely needs to be a lot simpler for the industry to adopt it.
Yeah, this looks like a lot. Also, the whole principle is completely new, and it's great for all the consumers. And but yeah, it looks like a lot and a lot of changes, so that everybody needs to get used to and kind of relearn programmatic almost.
Yeah, complete departure from what you are accustomed to, and
Yeah.
I think it does take a bit of getting used to. I mean, it's worth. I think I did mention that there are opportunities for advertisers here, and there is an opportunity for advertisers to be in far more control over their bidding strategy. Whereas before they tend to depend, or I would say rely on the DSPs to do that. Going forward, I think it could be mixed, because I've already seen quite a few large advertisers, particularly those that spend a phenomenal amount on programmatic, have already invested a lot of their time working out how they can actually provide the bidding function themselves. But again, it's not for everyone. It depends on your appetite for getting into the weeds of this. And there may be certain advantages for doing so for advertisers, because if it leads to better performance, then then this could be an option.